Okay, guys, it's Tuesday afternoon. It's time to get started on Close of Business. We're crazy excited about what we've got going today. We've done a couple of remote broadcasts, but I think today is going to set a new high for what we're doing. We're in Houston. We're over at Greentown Labs, and we've got the CEO of Greentown Labs, Emily Reichert, with us. You might remember she was with us. It's probably about a year ago or so.
About a year ago at this point.
When Greentown Labs first announced they were coming to Houston, they're a famous, well-known incubator technology sort of supporter. They're also in Somerville. And so we can't wait to talk to Emily. It's so great to have you with us. And we also have these new microphones, which I know we're going to get a lot of viewer mail, but these are exciting. And hopefully you can hear us a little better. Mike Bradley, what is on the screen today? What do you want to talk about? I know we spent 5 minutes in the pregame trying to decide how to pronounce the new Iranian guy's name. I might let you do that. But what do you got, my friend?
Yeah, Maynard. Glad to see you at the Greentown Labs. Yeah, but the screen is, I guess, in line with the Greentown Labs. It's a little bit green today. Obviously, we have the Fed speaking right now in front of Congress, so the markets are, pretty light right now. But what's going on here is obviously people have seen crudes moved up quite dramatically over the last couple of weeks, where it's, almost $75 Brent, $73 TI, and 12-month spreads and prompt spreads, time spreads have just exploded, and we're at sort of historic high. So it just tells you the market's really, really tight. Just to get a couple things out of the way, you're going to have an inventories report tomorrow. It looks like there's going to be 1.5 million type draw is what expectations for Cushing, and something in the 6 million draw range for total crude oil inventory. So we're drawing pretty dramatically in the U.S., and we're probably about 15 and maybe going to 20% below normal in the next week or so. So things are really, really tight. As it relates to what's going on, sort of more than, the macro, a couple things. First of all, you've got an OPEC meeting coming up in a couple of weeks. And as you realize, a little whiles back, a month ago, they decided that they're not going to do anything with production and stay where they are. Well, it looks like, with oil where it's at this point in time, with inventories with global supply and demand being probably 2.5 to 3 million underbalanced, that at some point they're going to have to put some barrels on the market. And so, with Iran out there potentially coming at some point in time, we'll talk about that in a second. I think there's some movement by Russia to say, hey, you know what, we need to start putting some barrels in the market. And so we're going to hear about what they plan to do for August. Right now, most expectations are they're not going to do anything. But, in the past, they've done, 500,000 barrel type increments. So if they do decide to do something, they'll do a 500,000 barrel increment. That would be something new. I think the market needs it. I don't think the market's going to overreact to that. And if they do that, it'll basically show you that, hey, they're cooperating and doing the right thing. Now, as it relates to Iran, obviously, new leader was just elected into Iran. He'll be coming in mid-August to start his term. His name is Raisi, and he replaces Rouhani. And, according to what people say right now, this guy's a little bit more hardliner. He's not willing to give in to what the U.S. says. But the issue here is that, if they're going to go ahead and get this, JCPOA done, and it's going to happen in the next 3 or 4 weeks. Now, the thing that people say is this guy's a hardliner. He probably doesn't want it, but it doesn't really matter what he says. It really depends on what the Ayatollah Khomeini thinks and what he wants. And it sounds like he wants to have a deal. At least that's what the people say. So, even if those barrels come on the market, I think it wouldn't be too much of a surprise. I think the surprise so far has been that they haven't had an agreement up to this point in time. So if they come to market, and even if they basically put 1.5 million on the market very, very quickly, the market needs those barrels. And so I don't think, as we said probably over the last couple of months, even if a deal happens, that's not going to crater the market. That's just going to kind of put a near-term top in the market. And so I think we still feel pretty good about where crude oil is at this point in time. OPEC's in control, and I think they're doing all the right things.
Okay. All right, Mike. Well, Matt Portillo, I know last week you couldn't join us because you were on the road talking to investors. And also there was a new piece this morning. You guys have been analyzing what's going on with private companies and what kind of volumes they might be adding back to U.S. production. So let me ask you about both those things.
Sure thing, Maynard. It was actually very exciting last week. Finally started to get back out on the road after 18 months. Feels like it's been forever. We were up in New York for 3 days, meeting with investors over dinners and then in-person meetings. So the city is opening back up, which is nice to see. Across the board, in terms of the conversations, pretty thematic in nature. On the upstream side of things, I would say clients are fairly constructive on both crude and natural gas for the next 6 months. And it really aligns with a lot of things that we've been talking about on COBT. A recovery in demand heading into Q4, sustained and curtailed supply that has been kept off the market, which has allowed inventories to recover. And then on the natural gas side, we've just seen very strong global demand trends pulling LNG out of the U.S., which has kept the NYMEX market well bid. So overall, clients are very constructive on the commodity backdrop over the next 6 months. I'd say the views start to diverge in 2022. And we'll get into that in a second, but really it comes down to how disruptive is U.S. supply. And that's something that we're going to keep a close eye on because it does start to really impact potentially some of the OPEC policy as we move forward. Other thematic topics that came up with a lot of frequency, CCS is definitely going to be a huge theme for the back half of this year. We've got our conference coming up on July 13th, so we're quite excited about that. Clients are digging into the economics. They're looking into which players in the industry are going to start to potentially invest in that business and are looking for ways to play it. So that is definitely a big topic for the industry in the back half of this year. And then as always, M&A is just very topical. I think on the gas side of things, we're expecting more industry consolidation, 1 or 2 basin champions to emerge in the Northeast, 1 or 2 basin champions to potentially emerge in the Haynesville, and continued consolidation on the oil side. And all those things are leading to, I think, a healthier industry over time. Lastly, just on the thematic topics, dividend distributions, cash returns are a big focus. Investors, even on the hedge fund side, are looking for this as a big part of the investment theme now. So as we've moved away from NAV, as we've moved more towards free cash flow focused metrics, dividend policies are a big focus for clients in New York. So with that, I'll hit the last topic that came up with a lot of frequency. Matt Murphy and Jenna work with me on the broader macro trends, but wanted to share this page here. So this is a highlight of how we're looking at private operator activity in the U.S., and it has been extremely robust. If you look since December of last year, the privates have added about 70 rigs in the core 5 shale oil plays, the vast majority of those coming in the Permian at about 50 rigs. So pretty significant activity. In fact, the Permian overall activity is pretty evenly split between the privates and the public. So the privates do matter a lot. What this ultimately has done is it has raised our forecast for supply growth, which obviously has implications for the macro, it has implications for the micro, and on the midstream side, it does have implications as well. But we're now expecting about 200,000 barrels a day of exit-to-exit supply coming from the privates in 2021, and effectively flattish supply from the publics in 2021. And then the privates, given our rig ramp that we see, and there's just less of a constraint on growth from the privates, will likely add about 350,000 barrels a day of production to the market in 2022. So these numbers do start to add up. One other big topic that we do cover pretty frequently with clients is just the question around productivity trends. And there have been questions on, are the privates significantly less productive than the publics? On average, the answer is yes. But in the core Permian Basin, which is really the key focus of supply growth, the answer is not really. And you can see based on the data pulls that we have there is a little bit of divergence on the private side, but it's not that material. And so as we think about the implications for asset quality, as well as the views around production trends, the Permian is really the dominant basin, which really does kind of drive our forecasted outlook. So just pulling it all together, what does this mean on the macro side of things? U.S. growth is going to accelerate meaningfully in 2022, even with the constraints we're seeing on the public market side of things. We're now pushing about 800,000 barrels a day of black oil production into the market out of the U.S., which is a big sea change from what we saw obviously in 2020 and 2021. And then when you include the liquid side of that, which would be the NGL stream, propane plus, we're probably pushing north of 900,000 barrels a day. So that starts to get back to a level, and based on some of the conversations that the team has had with OPEC, where they will be watching this. Don't necessarily think it's overly disruptive as of yet, but something that folks do need to watch as they move forward.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, Colin, what do you got, my friend?
Yes, well, we've got a lot of motion in $100 calls for WTI. Specifically, yesterday we saw the D21 $100 calls priced at 41 cents. That's up from 25 cents on Friday, a 64% move in one day. The motion happened on only a 2% increase in the number of lots that are in the open interest. And we now have about $6.7 million of value at risk in those puts. To put those numbers in perspective, coming into the year, the premium was 13 cents. The open interest was a little bit over 10,000 lots. We've had almost a 60% increase, and the value at risk was 1.3. And then going back to right before we had the announcements of the effectiveness of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, the calls were priced at 5 cents. And we had a 4,000 lot position. So the entire position was worth about $200,000. Turning to the out years, December 23, the $100 calls are priced at $1.18. Coming into the year, that was 49 cents. So about 140% move. And the same value at risk, about $6.8 million, up about 160% year to date. The interesting thing, beyond all that being interesting, is that the December 22 $100 calls have gone from 27 cents premium on about 10,000 lots coming into the year. And yesterday they were at 87-cent premium for about 61,000, 62,000 lots. So the value at risk went from about 2.8 million to now $54 million of live value at risk. So putting all those pieces together, it's been a long time since we've had credible forecasts for $100. We've seen some of the investment banks on kind of the forecasting side talking about $100. But here we have real live speculators putting money to work. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they expect to get to $100, but they're certainly giving us a sense of the skew and risk.
Boy, that's fascinating. Well, what as we turn to Emily, we're so excited to have you. And we did meet you a year ago. And at that time, you were just announcing that Greentown Labs was coming to Houston. Now we're here. It's up and running. And people are buying $100 oil calls. So wow, what just happened? But anyway, welcome, Emily. It's so great to have you.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. And I have to say, the last time we did this was over Zoom, and we are meeting in person for the first time. And who knew you were so tall?
Yeah.
So I learned something new today.
Well, speaking of large, you have this huge building here. We're in downtown Houston. If you haven't seen it, are people coming in? Tell us a little bit about the facility and what's happening and your visitors and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. So just to remind folks, we are the largest climate tech incubator in North America. And what does climate tech mean to us? It is about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And so we need to reduce those across all sectors of the economy, ranging from agriculture, manufacturing, buildings, transportation, really every aspect of the economy, including electricity sector, of course. So that is the type of companies, the startup companies that we see here at Greentown Labs and at our headquarters back in the Boston area, Somerville, Massachusetts, as you mentioned, where the cool kids are whenever you're talking about Cambridge, Boston area, where the cool kids are, that's Somerville. And that's where we are. But so what does it mean for us to be a climate tech incubator? Basically, we are helping young companies get their start. They start here. They might be anywhere from 4 people to 10 people. They stick with us for about 2 years on average. And what they're doing while they're with us is they're building a prototype. They're finding first customers. They're testing things. They're evaluating. They're raising money. And eventually that gets them out of the incubator and then into the world where they typically are partnering with one of our larger partners. And so we work with about 70 large corporations, really across the energy sector, broadly defined, to help that technology get to market at scale. And so where are we today? We are at Greentown, Houston, which just opened a little over a month ago. It is, we're still kind of getting things oriented here. We are filling the lab, but we opened the doors and we had about 30 young companies want to join on day one. Wow. So people were saying, oh, does Houston really have entrepreneurs? And go figure, Houston has a lot of entrepreneurs. We now have 40 companies at Greentown, Houston. The pipeline is strong. And overall, that brings us to about 180 companies that are currently being housed at Greentown Labs or are part of our overall program. So the numbers keep going up because there's a lot of people who are very excited about this sector and the investment opportunities in this sector. We're also just seeing so much money flowing in because people see the opportunity in the energy transition. So that's a little bit of background. 40,000 square feet here at Greentown, Houston, and we're standing in our event space where we are convening an ecosystem around entrepreneurs to help them get their start and grow into the world, create jobs, and become awesome companies.
Wow, it's so fantastic. I think you and I were talking about this in the pregame as we were just kind of chit-chatting, which is if you've been around Houston, like when I think of Houston, I think of Mattress Mac. You know, he got here with $20 and now he's got this furniture empire. Like the city is so, you know, it's nothing but entrepreneurs is what it feels like sometimes. But on the outside, when you're away from Houston and you just don't get that impression. So like, how did you get to know Houston, realize there was this huge potential community here? Because at first blush, it's like, well, wait a minute, that's the oil capital of the world. Will that really be the clean tech capital of the world? I think everybody'd love to hear how you got to know Houston.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have to say that from the very early days of Greentown Houston being a concept, there were definitely naysayers out there that were saying exactly that. This is the oil and gas capital. Why would you want to go there? Are there any entrepreneurs there? And by entrepreneurs, they're meaning, you know, the kind that
like
are coming out of
clean tech entrepreneurs.
Clean tech entrepreneurs. So that was maybe a little bit in my mind when I first got here for a CERAWeek conference where I was speaking, and that was about spring of 2019. And during that conference, I was lucky to have a board member based in Houston who set up a bunch of meetings to explore whether Greentown Houston might be a thing. I was skeptical, but over the course of about 2 days worth of meetings, I met a lot of corporate partners or potential corporate partners who might fund this. And I understood there was strong interest from the city. But what really made it work for me was that one of the evenings, this same board member actually collected with about 2 days notice, 20 young companies who came together at a bar in Edo, which is kind of Somerville of Houston. And they were saying things like, Houston needs a community for clean tech entrepreneurs. And to me, that was the signal. There was something here.
Your impact here could be.
There needed to be support for this type of entrepreneur. And, you know, I'd say that has borne out as we've come in. I mean, honestly, like we are in a building that still doesn't have a sign outside. You know, we don't have the machine shop quite set up yet, but we had entrepreneurs wanting to come in and be part of a community from day one. So that was worth just getting it started, and we will continue to build.
When you hear those of us in and around oil and gas, you know, the things we often talk about as it relates to technology and clean tech, you hear us talking about, well, first of all, the scope of the engineering skills that are available, because this is the scope of this challenge is massive. So you hear us talking about our people, and then you hear us talking a lot about things which are sort of cousins of the industry, like carbon capture, like hydrogen. So do you feel, does your community here reflect those types of flavors, say more than the Somerville group, or what are you seeing here as a, you know, in terms of, I guess flavors is the right way to say it.
Well, a lot of questions there. Just to pull back a
only
little bit.
Nine.
Yeah, only nine embedded questions. Yeah. So just to pull back a little bit. So how is Greentown Labs thinking about this? So we actually tend to not use the word clean tech because we feel like there's a bit of a value judgment in there. Clean versus dirty. That's why we talk about climate, because climate, it's about solving a problem. So that is how we talk about it. We also talk about
climate tech.
Climate tech. Okay. And we also talk about the energy transition because that's kind of what needs to happen. And the energy transition and climate tech is very broad. It's decarbonizing across the board, all of these different sectors that will need to do so if we are going to get emissions to the point we need to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. So that includes things like carbon capture, right? Because if you go look at the IPCC report from 2018, the one that said we have 10 years to like figure out figure this out, it says that carbon capture is part of the solution.
Yeah.
So you got to look at the science and engineering that has already been figured out. People are understanding what needs to be done here. The other big one is hydrogen. We would consider that as part of the mix. Energy storage. And you were getting to the point around, what are the jobs or engineering challenges that a place like Houston.
Yeah, kind of the human capital side of the thing.
The human capital. The good news is that we don't have to do a one-to-one replacement where it's oil and gas jobs now becomes wind and solar jobs. I don't think that's realistic. But
I don't think the math works if you were trying to it's not a good analogy, I think, in a lot of ways.
Exactly. But when you include energy storage, so that's chemistry, when you include circular economy, when you include carbon capture and sequestration, when you include hydrogen, that's that same workforce that's used to solving really hard industrial problems. And that workforce can be redeployed in this broader thinking around climate tech and the energy transition. So that's how we think about it. It's a very inclusive, expansive, how do we solve this problem together versus, pointing a finger and saying, you're bad, you need to be done. We don't do that here.
Yeah. No, and then the oil and gas people are like, that's nice you called me bad. By the way, I powered your world, so can I sit at the table and try to solve this with you?
I got here in an airplane, you know?
It's, well, can I try a definition or an understanding? Because it's a great point about clean tech. It does have this, whatever, maybe it's a little outdated, and climate tech seems like a better expression. The energy transition, it seems like one way to think about that is we've been in a world where what we cared about was, I want it to be reliable and I want it to be cheap. That's it. But the transition is, I want it to be reliable, I want it to be cheap, and I want it to have as little impact as possible.
I want to lower the greenhouse gas emissions.
I want to lower the greenhouse gas. I want to lower the side effects of what it's doing. But I didn't say anything about a flavor of energy. So is the way people are thinking about energy transition changing because, quote, clean oil and gas or cleaner oil and gas is just part of that transition? I'm leading the witness a little bit, but I mean, I think that to me, that just seems like a more inclusive, holistic way to talk about it.
Well, I think there's what we need to do today, and then there's where we need to go by 2030, and then there's where we need to go by 2050. And you really have to look at the problem from a perspective that this is going to take a long time. At Greentown, we like to say that you should be able to get a job in climate tech, basically for entire lifetime of most of the employees we have today, because there are so many problems to solve. There is an endless stream of work that we need to do. And it's for folks that are in not only technical fields and engineering fields, but also finance people, business people. There's just so much to do. So, I tend to think of it that way. So when you look at today and what needs to be done, absolutely, we just need to be reducing the amount of emissions that are going in the atmosphere, the amount of methane that's going in the atmosphere. That is very potent greenhouse gas. And then we need to think, okay, now let's look out 10 years. Where do we need to get in 10 years? And you work from there. So it's all about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but there are steps and stages that will get us there.
We had this people from Salk come on, and they talked about some nature-based things that they're working on. Do you find that the nature-based ideas, is that something that comes into your work? What do you think of that space?
Well, I think that comes in under the agriculture side of things. So it's definitely getting a lot of attention around kind of natural ways, quote unquote, to store carbon. I think that's probably the place that I would think is the most likely natural solution that comes to, again, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. That is the commonality of everything that we're trying to do. So it's really interesting, actually. I think agriculture is one of those areas that, you think about solar, wind, the grid, all of those things come up over and over when you're thinking about climate tech. But really, there's just this whole series of different sectors that all need to be attacked over time. And so we need to think about all of them. And agriculture is one that just continues to generate a lot of interesting companies that are attacking this from all different directions.
Emily, it's Matt. Just a follow-up question to the broader topic, which is, it feels like there has been a bit of a divergence between solar, wind, and kind of green renewables, and then some of the solutions that the industry is also starting to look at, which is CCS and some other opportunities. It sounds like Greentown is really looking at this in a holistic view, that all those solutions are going to be necessary in order to reduce carbon. But I was curious if you could comment on that topic in particular at a high level. And then as you see all these new technologies coming into Greentown Labs, I was just curious, what do you think is the most interesting thing we should be watching over the next couple of years as some of the new technology emerges?
Yeah, so I think at a high level, you framed it really well. I think that holistic way of looking at things, certainly renewable energy is a big part of the solution coupled with storage, but we need to think that there are things that need to happen with taking carbon out of the atmosphere that's there today. And so that has to be part of the overall solution. You have to, I think why we say climate tech, we say climate tech because that is the problem, and everyone can get to the point where they are solving a problem together. So if you can group all of these solutions together and understand that everyone's going to play a different role in this, there's a role for the current big energy companies to play today. They are the ones that know how to do the technology development, that is going to be needed to do carbon capture and hydrogen. So, will that happen tomorrow? No. Will it happen in 10 years? I think we'll make some really good progress in 10 years. There is so much excitement right now. We joke about it at Greentown Labs, actually, about hydrogen. Like, hydrogen has come back. And I think that, that's one area that I would point to as being something that can be, reutilize a lot of what's happening today as a step towards the future. The other thing that I see keep popping up is different couplings with geothermal, which, it's again, like the past coming back again. Things that are very energy intensive being coupled with geothermal, like the creation of Bitcoins, for example. And so things that are a little bit of a play or a different business around that. And then I mentioned agriculture already. I think that one thing that we're overlooking is, and this maybe isn't really a startup problem, but the change that needs to happen overall with transmission. We've got that on a massive infrastructure level scale in this country that needs to be addressed if we're going to massively have renewables on the grid. And I don't know, that's not a startup problem to solve, but it is something that people are increasingly talking about as needing to be part of an overall set of solutions that moves us forward towards that net zero 2050 goal.
I think one thing we're always curious about is, because this is a global problem we're trying to solve, and sometimes we get really fixated on our neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, in other neighborhoods around the planet, they're less, for other reasons, they're not focused on it. How does, China, of course, and the developing world and technologies that will help them help us? Like, how do you think about some of your global endeavors? Like, are we going to see a Greentown China, or pick a place? Just how do you think about all that?
Yeah, well, I think this is why I am confident that the energy transition is going to, I've already seen just in the 2 years I've been coming to Houston, the momentum, the way that people talk about it. It's no longer talking, it's, we need to do something. They don't always know what to do, but depending on where they are in the value chain, they're taking different steps. So the energy transition is here to stay, and it is gaining momentum. But why is that? I mean, you've got oil prices going up. Yes, that is going to be a factor. I think people need to be, frankly, investing for the future, because I don't think this is going to, maybe we get one more big bump like this, but you have to look at what's going on in the rest of the world. You have Europe with a Green New Deal. You have Korea, South Korea with a net zero 2050 goal. You have China with a net zero 2060 goal. So, and Japan with the 2050 goal. So the rest of the world industrialized world is moving in this direction. So that means over time, that is going to come back to the United States. And we can choose to say, well, we're going to just continue what we've been doing and be the last ones to innovate and evolve, or we can grab it and we can say, America is going to own this. And that's what we should do, because we are innovative. We are the people that can make it happen. And so in a place like Houston, where this energy knowledge, engineering strength is so deep, it's like, come on, guys, let's grab it. And I feel like increasingly people are grabbing it. They understand the opportunity and they want to go after it. And that's really exciting.
Did it matter to you that NASA was here? Was that kind of interesting to you? Like, there's just so much fascinating technology. There's obviously a lot of other things. The ship channel is one of the largest industrial complexes in the world. If you just capture the CO2 there, we're way ahead of the game. But like, were there other parts of Houston that you found interesting? The restaurants, Rice is here.
Okay. The food here is amazing. So I had to travel here several times during the pandemic for different milestones on Greentown Houston. And even the DoorDash is like stupendous, like so damn good. It's like even DoorDash is good. So Houston has amazing food. So people should know that. In terms of, I'm sorry.
The universities and NASA and just some of the other things.
So I'd say one of the most interesting opportunities looking at Houston more broadly is the port. There is so much interesting innovation you can do relative to the port. It is so carbon intense. That is an opportunity across logistics. It is an opportunity, of course, about the operations of refineries and things that are going on there. It is an opportunity in so many different elements. There's actually the largest port in Europe, I think, or second largest, the port of Rotterdam, is doing a lot of work relative to trying to decarbonize their port. And I think that really provides an interesting model for Houston to think about. And it's about being a leader. Why shouldn't Houston do it first? All of these different sectors, all of these different kind of pieces of the puzzle. Hydrogen makes sense to do here. Carbon capture makes sense to do here. You've got the engineering and science strength to do the energy storage from the fundamental perspective. Let's do that here. Let's get it done.
So Emily, congratulations on Greentown Houston. That's fantastic. And we're so happy to support you and all of the companies that you're working with. I think the audience maybe would love to hear a little bit more detail about how the companies move through the incubator and what sort of services and assistance you're providing to help them get what we all want, is that those big brains start producing some really great.
Yeah, great question. So how does an incubator work? Fundamentally, our mission, and we are a mission-based organization, we do not take equity in the companies. Our job is to get the technology out into the world where it can really have an impact. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, we pick companies coming in that have a high probability of success. So we are picking from the best universities. We are finding the best entrepreneurs and selecting those companies very carefully. And on average, they typically have some funding when they get to us. So these are young companies that have already been validated externally by either another investor or a government grant. Something has basically told us that this is a high quality company that has been vetted. So what do they do while they're with us? One thing they're typically doing is, if they're a university company, they might have built something in a laboratory, maybe one. Or maybe two of the beta product or a prototype. So they need to then show that they can make multiples of that and that can be cost effective. So we're connecting them with manufacturers that can help them think through that. We're connecting them with large companies that know how to set things up from a logistics standpoint at scale. And we're connecting them, of course, to investors. And so that combination of the manufacturing strength, because we really mainly support companies that are doing hardware. Software companies, you can just develop that in a coffee shop. You don't really need a Greentown Labs, but the companies that are building a physical product, they do need something like us to be able to make that journey. And what we do is take all of the other things away off of their plates that they don't need to worry about, all the overhead related things, setting up the internet, setting up coffee, having a lunchroom. Like, they don't need to worry about any of that stuff. They need to worry about their company, their team, and they need to worry about that technology and how that is developed. So typically, while they're with us, they will go through a process of identifying a way to test their technology in a real world environment. That might be with a pilot partner who's a large corporation. It might be with a city, municipality, could be with a lot of different partners. And that getting that data showing that it works in a real world environment is pretty critical to getting a Series A round of investment, which is typically the reason and the way, I should say, that they get out of our incubator. So that would typically be $5 to $15 million. And that is what launches them to be a company that then continues to scale. And we keep track of them once they're alumni. We bring them back in because the voices of entrepreneurs, that peer group that has just gone through it, is really, really valuable to the next set of entrepreneurs that we are supporting. So all in all, it's about 2 years. It's about very customized matchmaking and services right around the things that this particular type of company needs. We know that expertise, the resources in terms of laboratory things that these companies need. So it's really something we've built up over about 8 years now. That is a pretty strong product to help these companies grow.
I was just wondering, Emily, I guess the thing that, as we've been around this over 3 or 4 years, the question people always have has been when that private investment community will show up. That it's very circular, the money draws the people and the people draw the money. And so are you noticing in Houston, the private capital, venture capital community of investors, is it growing, swelling? Will that help? Do you see that as the critical piece that it would seem to be? How do you think about that?
So the first thing I'd say is that money moves around. We have less concern than we used to. Maybe 10 years ago, a Boston angel would only be funding companies in Boston. That's just not the case anymore.
Yeah.
All of these firms,
So
what
the
we
Silicon
actually
Valley
see,
model, we don't have to have that. The money will.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
We have Boston companies that go raise money in Houston, or they go raise money in California, or they go raise money in New York. They bring it back and they build a company in Boston because of the talent base. So money is where it comes from is not as important as it used to be. And the entrepreneurs are scrappy. They're going to go where they find a match with an investor that's at the right stage for them, that is interested in the technology that's going to add value to the company as part of the board of directors. So the money moves around in ways that you wouldn't necessarily think. I think in terms of where Houston is, in terms of capital for early stage, I'd say that is definitely an area that we need to continue to cultivate. So one thing that we've started doing is bringing together groups of angel investors who have traditionally invested in more energy that would be more oriented towards oil and gas, and trying to form a community, build a community of them to help them learn from each other. But more importantly, we brought an angel investment group from Boston to help train angel investors here. And so there's a due diligence process. There's an understanding of what the different technologies are that can be not quite wrapped up with a bow, but it can be translated to a new context. And we've already seen some investments from the Boston investors into Houston companies.
Oh, really? Well, when you think about it, the mindset of an oil and gas, the original explorationist mindset, I mean, this is a community of people that will take risk. So you would think they could really jump in and get active in all this. I
think the challenge is maybe not knowing the breadth or the diversity of opportunities. And I think that that's something that we can very much highlight at Greentown Labs. There are so many different investment opportunities when you think of just how many sectors need to be decarbonized. And so I think that there is some learning to be done there, that it's not just solar and wind, because that's what everyone thinks about, right? And then you're like, well, that's already deployable. Like, why would I invest in that if I'm an early stage investor? So I think there's some awareness building that we need to do about what the opportunities are. And then there's a diligence piece that, investors who haven't been investing in energy storage up until now, may feel some trepidation about jumping into that. Well, that's when we do the connecting of angels or others who have already been investing in those areas. And we've actually been bringing folks from Houston also up to Boston to meet with Boston-based investors. So we're trying to build a bridge of knowledge of people that we know are very prominent investors in Boston, building that bridge to Houston. And it's beneficial to both sides because of the investment opportunities and the learning that can happen and frankly, the relationships that we're already seeing built.
So we'll have to look for if the Sox play the Astros again, like the Greentown Labs will sponsor the beer area or something, the low carbon beer area.
It will definitely be low carbon.
Low calorie, low carbon. One question, just looking at the sponsors, there's a lot of cool signage around about the people involved, companies, et cetera. I noticed, some international companies like Japanese companies, et cetera. Are you, it's interesting, you've got kind of a Boston, Houston connection going. Obviously, this whole thing is much bigger than that. But are you increasingly feeling, I'm back on the Greentown Japan idea now, but are you increasingly feeling that international community connecting? And because there's a lot of talent in, like, I'm just looking, you've got Mitsubishi there, but there's a lot of talent in a lot of global companies.
I absolutely think we'll get there. I think for now, the main way that we are international is through our partners. So we work with, as you mentioned, a lot of Japanese companies in particular. We also work with a lot of European companies who have been partners and supporters of Greentown Labs for many years now, who have partnered with our startups, who have invested in our startups. So that's our main international outreach at this point. We're really focused on national expansion at this point, and particularly expanding into places where, one, entrepreneurs need a community, and two, where there's a bigger impact beyond, there's a bigger climate impact. I mean, one of our goals here in Houston is actually to change the conversation to make it one of opportunity about what's coming versus one of pointing fingers and saying, you guys are bad. Because your oil and gas in the past, it's just so not helpful. And so what we're trying to do is provide paint the picture of the future, which I fully believe exists because of the startups that I see around me every single day. We're trying to be the visual representation of that. And so there's other places in the United States, especially in the middle of the country, where you could see something like that would also be very useful. It's like, it's about the future and how we go from here to there. And one way we're going to do that is through entrepreneurship.
Is there, sometimes we talk about the public, broadly is sort of like in this whole equation, the people who honestly seem to get the least information about all this. Is there, and, sorry, it's just affecting your whole world. Maybe we can involve the public, but do you interact much with the public? Do you try to do broader outreach or the schools, or how do you see Greentown's mission there?
Yeah. So from day one, we've always done public events. And so we invite folks in. I'd say we get more of the kind of professional climate or energy interested folks coming here more than anyone else. But it's interesting, since we've been here, we have done a couple of virtual job fairs in partnership with other organizations. And the amount of interest when you put energy transition job fair on the description of the event, overwhelming. Like there is a hunger for this information out there and to understand what this future can look like and how people can be a part of it. And so I think that that's one way that we will continue to, we can be a place, a convener. We can also share a message, and through the stories of our entrepreneurs and our partners who are making this transition. So I think we provide a lot of very visual, just a reminder that there are real people doing this, and it is actually happening, and you can be a part of it.
Just thinking, we touched on this a little in the beginning, but just management teams and board members of energy companies who are really trying to absorb all this and think about strategy and finance and opportunity and risk. I'm thinking out loud, but it seems like we could have a really neat gathering for like board members of energy companies here and talk about all that stuff.
Absolutely. I think that's the type of conversations we need to have. The folks that are in the decision-making roles that have the opportunity to influence, who have the opportunity to make decisions that can change the whole direction of a company and prepare it for what's coming. I mean, it's fiscally, it's responsible. You have a responsibility as a board member to help this company to prepare itself for the future. And this future is coming. So we can prepare or we cannot prepare. So I think the ones that prepare and really think about this are the companies that are going to continue into the future.
Just last comment, we're probably going to have to wrap up, but Matt obviously was just visiting with investors. The investor community is a broad-based one. There's many different approaches and specializations, but do you ever deal much with public investors? Because as I'm thinking about them, they want classic energy companies to perform, pay dividends, do all the great stuff. By the way, prepare for the future. By the way, so there's a lot you're solving for. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering, do you interact much with that community, the public investors who are sometimes calling for change, sometimes just calling for profits, sometimes profits and change? There's a real mixed bag of people out there you're answering to.
Yeah, the profits plus change. That seems like a pretty tall order. I think one way we engage with kind of larger financial institutions, not necessarily the institutional investors. That's not really people that we would be overlapping with for any reason. But I think at least for the large banks, we do have several of those that are supporters and sponsors of Greentown Labs. So there's kind of engagement at that level. But I think everyone should be realistic about this ship that is traveling, and it's traveling slowly and it's very heavy and it has momentum in a certain direction. And to turn that ship is going to take a lot of energy, time, knowledge, awareness, and a vision. Mm-hmm. And I think that is maybe missed whenever people are just putting pressure on. It's like, what's going to happen to those employees? That's what I always go back to: lives and livelihoods. Yeah. So if you do this too quickly, you put a bunch of people out of work. That is not okay.
Well, and the thing we talk about all the time is oil and gas practice here is practiced in the cleanest standards anywhere on the planet. So if you want the oil and gas we are using, you would think, if you're just kind of thinking climate-wise, let's use this first and then go to the backup, which might not be as clean. That would be your climate orientation. But unfortunately, some of these policies are turning it on its head and making it the reverse.
Yeah. Well, I think we can only kind of control what we can control, right? Yeah. So we can start at home and we can plan for the future here in Houston.
Well, we're so lucky you came to Houston. This is really fun. We've had a great time getting to know you. Our whole company, everybody's excited about the relationship. And now we have an idea for, I think we're calling it a director party here at Greentown Labs.
We got the tap running. Transition on tap Thursday nights.
All right.
Every other week.
There you go. Thanks, Emily. Thanks, everybody.